Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another episode of Two Economists and a Lender, where we take a deep dive into the most important economic issues facing agriculture. I'm your host, Carly Jacobson, and this month we have David Widmar and Brent Gloy back with us from Agricultural Economic Insights, along with our own Eric Lantis, an officer out of Southeast Nebraska region. So today's topic addresses a great habit that can get easily overlooked. Good business meetings create consistency, focus, and agreement with those involved in the operation. And for some of you listening, I'm going to guess that this discussion may simply be great reminders, validation for your existing process, even. But for others, hopefully you'll be inspired to start the habit. And either way, we're glad you joined us today. So, Brent, with all that, let me get this kicked over to you to get us started.
Hey, Carly, thanks for the introduction. And I'm looking forward to talking with you today about business meetings. And David knows me pretty well, and he knows one of the things that is a challenge is for me to give up time on my calendar for meetings because I really don't enjoy a lot of meetings. And, I worked at the university for, I don't know, 15 years or something like that. And universities are really good at having meetings, and the meetings aren't always that great. And so I think we've all been in meetings that we didn't enjoy or we thought was a waste of time. And I will say that after a while, you have to kind of look at yourself in the mirror a little bit and ask yourself if there's something you can do to make the meetings better. And today, I think we're going to give you some good tips that I think will help you have more effective meetings, but more importantly, get you started in having a business meeting, which I think for our business is one of the most important things that we can do. And I'll give you three key reasons. First of all, it kind of gets everybody on the same page, but more importantly, and more basically, it gives you a chance to sit back, especially in these strategic meetings, to sit back, think, define the direction and goals of your organization, which we all have them, but writing your goals down, taking time to get everybody on the same page is really, really important. It can really get your organization charged and going in the right direction. The meetings also give us a way to have time or bandwidth for those important conversations. And one of the things David always says is, well, just because we don't talk about the problem doesn't mean it's going to go away. In fact, it probably is only going to get worse. And so, not saying it's only to solve problems or address problems, but it gives us that chance to have those important conversations that I think are really important. And the third thing is that I think getting that habit going, we call it a habit for a reason. And I would challenge you, think about what you did this morning, what you did the last week. And my bet is it's pretty similar. And I know that, we wake up and we kind of do the same thing over and over. And I bet if you change that routine and you change it for 2 or 3 days, all of a sudden that would become the habit. And so what we want to do is create that habit of having that business meeting, getting it going and doing it. And I think once you do that, it will start to feel normal, and it will start to feel like something that's really, really important, really, really useful. So we believe strongly that these are important. We're going to give you some ideas for how to make those meetings effective and create that business meeting habit. But as we get started, one of the things I want to do is give you a chance to provide some feedback. And I kind of told you a little bit about my experience with meetings, which has not always been that positive. And I think, you can think about a meeting you regularly attend. It could be your business, or it could be an organization you're involved with. I think most of us are involved in some kind of organization as well. I want you to think about that meeting and tell me what describes your feelings about that meeting. Man, I avoid it at all costs. Well, it's a necessary evil. Oh my gosh, another meeting, seriously? And somehow it really works well. I want you to just go ahead and take a minute to give us a response on that. Yeah, very few people want to avoid them at all costs. Call them More people call it necessary evil, and about 41% saying, hey, they're working out pretty well. And that's great. I'm glad to hear that. So, David, what do you think?
Well, we might have had a selection bias here, Brent. Maybe the people who said avoid at all costs didn't want to jump on today's call to learn about meetings. But I think
That's
um,
probably true.
I think what we're trying to do today is to provide really great strategies for getting started. And what we wanted to do is to share a bit of a framework to help you think about this. And those 4 categories that we had you do a poll in, you can see this 2x2 matrix. And what we've done is we're trying to create a framework so you can say, okay, this is where I'm at. Now, how do I move the needle? How do we get to a meeting that really works? And there's kind of 2 elements here. Along the top, you can see there's this substance of this meeting, and that's kind of another way of framing that would be, are we talking about the right things? Is this meeting creating value from this? And then along the vertical axis here, going up and down, the logistics of the meeting. Is this meeting running smoothly? Is it a painful meeting, or is it a relatively painless meeting? So this idea of avoid at all, which we didn't see anybody jump into there. This is the idea of a meeting that's painful to sit through. It's just kind of logistically a nightmare, and it doesn't create a whole lot of value. But you can see as you move around, there are some meetings that have value, but just aren't running quite logistically as smooth as they needed to do. Or on the other hand, you have maybe a meeting that doesn't have a lot of substance to it, doesn't create a lot of meaningful takeaways, but you get to see people you get to see people you like. Maybe they give you a pizza, and so you're just like, well, it's another meeting, but I'm just going to go and check the box and move through. So again, how can we move whatever meeting we're in or whatever meeting we're trying to run, how can we move it up and to the left into that somehow it works well quadrant? So today we're going to break this down into those 2 qualities. How can we improve the substance, and how can we improve the logistics of that? So the first tip here for improving the substance is to really get specific and define the meeting's purpose. I think this is one of the hardest things that we can do. Some of this is going to be on the leader of that meeting. Some of this is going to be on the organization itself. What is it that we want to discuss as a farm? What is it that we want to discuss as a business? Without that discipline or that clarity, the urgent issues will always dominate the conversation. There is this idea of these urgent important things and these non-urgent important things, and if we don't carve out time for these not urgent but important things like strategic planning or long-term visions or long-term growth strategies, we'll get caught up with how we're going to get the next 40 acres of alfalfa mowed, how we're going to get the feed lined up for our cattle this year. Not to say those aren't important. Those are very, very important conversations. We have to carve out and make sure we have bandwidth, as we talked about earlier, for those other conversations as well. Second point, keep it simple. I think maybe this is maybe a bad habit that I have is, hey, we have 60 minutes here. Let's try to cover all the bases at one time. And so we might have a meeting that tries to span all the issues that our farm could be dealing with. And that has a couple problems to it that I think will be evident, including who do we invite to these meetings? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right time frame? But one of the really important ideas to keep in mind is switching costs. So if we're trying to talk about how we're going to get this tractor repaired this week, and then all of a sudden we switch gears and say, how are we going to grow and expand the livestock operation? And then finally we jump to the third topic is what's our herbicide plan for 2023? Those topics could all be important, but we probably shouldn't line them up in the same meeting, or we shouldn't put them next to each other in that category, because it takes time for the organization to transition through these different conversations. It takes different parts of our thinking and different members of our organization to really lead those conversations and provide input. This brings us all down. This last point is to really identify the scope. And so if we think about the purpose and we work towards a scope of that meeting, oftentimes the types of meetings that many farm businesses need to have or sort of can be broken into 2 categories: tactical and strategic meetings. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that, and your operation could split them up just a little bit differently, but this is a good starting point for how we can divide these meetings up, and you can build off of it and grow from there. But what is a tactical meeting? Well, these are typically those short-term focused meetings. They have a pretty short timeline. It's often cases, what do we need to get done? When does it need to get done by, and by whom does it need to get done? This is, a lot of, think about equipment or livestock that needs to be fed, or it's a very oriented around our day-to-day tasks. The logistics of these types of meetings can be weekly or monthly in nature. They're usually shorter. We've all heard the phrase a standing meeting. Typically, these are referring to these tactical meetings where, they're just going to be kind of very short and efficient and effective. And we're going to talk about the key issues, and that's all we're going to talk about, the sort of those very short-term ideas. In these tactical meetings, you might also have your key employees involved. This could be people who are going to help you carry out those weekly or monthly tasks on the ideas. And the third point here on tactical meetings is they're going to be oriented. They're going to naturally evolve around what the main activities are that are going on for the operation at that time. So it might be this time of the year around harvest. When you get in the spring, those meetings are going to focus on getting the crop planted. When you're in calving season, you're just focused on that activity that's really dominating the workload for the organization. Now, on the other side of the proverbial coin, there are strategic meetings, and these need to be these are typically long-term focused. What are our business goals? How do we establish those goals? How do we update those goals? What are the plans that we need to put in place to make progress towards those goals? These logistic meetings are often quarterly or annual in nature. This is one of those meetings that's easy to put off. It's easy to miss this one for maybe a quarter or a year. And that can really start to be detrimental, because we kind of keep putting those fires out with those tactical meetings, but we never sort of make sure the ship is headed in the right direction. The other part of the logistics here is that pre-work could often be required. Maybe we need to get together our financial statements. Maybe we need to, have some pre-planning or some pre-reading that we need to do so everybody gets caught up to speed. These meetings could be maybe a few hours in length. Maybe there's multiple iterations of them. Maybe they're off-site. And then also the stakeholders involved could also be more of the stakeholders, more of the owners, the spouses, the older generation, the younger generation. We want to really make sure we get the right folks involved in there. And if the starting point for those tactical meetings are what are the activities that we're going to be doing the next 2 to 3 weeks, the starting point for these more strategic meetings might oftentimes be sort of the financial situation. What are our operational plans for the year? What are our budget projections? And so this can be a way to start to kind of kick off those meetings and kind of help pull things together as we prepare and think about those.
David, I think this distinction between the tactical and strategic is really important, and they're both important topics, but they shouldn't, it's, I think, best not to mix them, because a lot of the people involved are different, and the type of thinking, I think, is different as well. But both of them are really important. It's important to have them both. When we think about, your matrix, you had kind of what's the content of the meeting, short term, long term. Then the second big thing is improve the meeting logistics. How is the meeting run? And I think this is really key. And this is really, I think, where a lot of frustration goes. Everybody that's in that room is there for a reason. They're trying they're committed to the organization. They're trying to do something better. But if the meeting's not run well, it's really can be a problem. And so I think the first thing is, get a good location, get a time, share it, have people there on time, set a reasonable timeline for your meeting. Nobody wants to go to 3-hour meetings, especially all in one shot. It's just longer than your brain can process things. So get a location, get a time, get an agenda, share that agenda before the meeting so that people can look at it and say, hey, I really think we need to do this or that, so that we don't spend the first 30 minutes of the meeting kind of arm wrestling over what the meeting should actually be about. I think that's really, really important, and get everybody committed to looking at that before. Then, define everybody's roles. Who's there? Who needs to be there? Because there's nothing worse than, getting into a really in-depth discussion and saying, well, we really need to know what Dave thinks on this. Well, Dave's not here. Well, I think this is what Dave would think. And somebody else says, well, no, I think Dave would think this. And so we spend 30, 40 minutes debating what Dave might think, and Dave's not even in the room, and he might think something completely differently. It's really wasted time. The other thing, who's leading the meeting and how are they going to lead it? And that's a really challenging role, because, it's a fine line between really keeping the meeting running on the agenda versus not hearing what people want to say. And I think that's a role that everybody can handle, but it takes time to get to it, and you have to understand that there's going to be growth involved in doing it, but practice is the way to do it. You have a note taker at your meeting, good thing to have, really important, really useful. And then kind of think about, okay, how are we as an organization going to make decisions? Do we have to have consensus? Do we have to have everybody bought in? Is it just, majority rules? What are the ways that you're going to go ahead and make decisions? During that meeting, then, it's really important to stay focused. And this is something David and I struggle with a lot, because we both like to brainstorm a lot, and very quickly we can get completely off track on something that might be important but really tangential. And one thing David has done that helps me a lot and helps us a lot is to create what he calls a parking lot. Well, this is a good idea, Brent. Let's put it up here. It makes me feel like my input is valuable. Even if we are setting it aside, we may not get back to that parking lot. I think we're like one of those car factories. It's got like thousands of cars sitting out in Arrowhead Stadium parking lot or something. But it's useful to help us keep on track, because when he says, I know, yeah, he's right, that's off a topic, let's get back to it. Get to some kind of an actionable resolution, something that, meeting that results in nobody leaving with anything, to do is just not really that useful. Stay on time. Nothing more frustrating than going to a meeting that should last an hour and spending 3 hours in it. It's really difficult. And then finally, I think minimizing distractions. That could be your phone. That can be, there's all kinds of things, people running in and out. Set up an environment where there's not that many distractions. And I think that will help improve your meeting logistics tremendously. Finally, once we get done, I think it's important to document. That's back to that role of the note taker. What did you discuss? What did you decide? And what are the next steps? That way we can have some accountability when we start the next meeting. Say, here's what we discussed. Here's what we decided last time. What happened? And then finally, I think get a chance for people to provide feedback, to identify, hey, this is just not working. I am sick and tired of coming to this meeting for this reason. Get us a chance, or hey, that meeting was really good. I feel like we got a lot done. Get a chance to identify some of those bad habits that we all have and improve that meeting. Take a chance to go seek out that feedback, whether it be, if you're the chair, to do it informally afterwards, or even formalize it with a chance for some feedback that makes people feel like, their opinions are being heard.
I want to kind of wrap this up by saying, all of us on today's webinar are sharing sort of our experiences. None of us were sort of naturally born as great meeting leaders or meeting organizers, but we've learned some stuff along the way. A lot of this is some skill that can be improved and developed. And kind of to conclude this section is there are 1,000 ways to run a bad meeting, but there's no fail-safe recipe for success. There's not going to be a bullet list or a checklist that we can put together that's going to work for every operation that's listening today, let alone every type of meeting that you might be involved with as a member of your community. Also, another key point is just get started, work on improvement, and stay committed. Oftentimes, this idea that great can be the enemy of good. Your first family farm meeting probably isn't going to be your best one, but you got to get started. And if you want to have a great meeting, you got to get started, you got to improve, you got to stay committed. And also recognize the process will involve. The meetings that your family likely had 2 decades ago aren't going to be sufficient for what you need today. Similarly, what you put together today will probably be insufficient down the road. Now, I'm not saying we need to take all of our meetings to TikTok or the meta or some sort of avatar land, but you have to be willing to evolve and update as the people and as the issues and as the challenges shift and change over time. So at this point, we're going to have Eric join us. He's our lender expert for the month. He really helped us put together these thoughts. As you can imagine, we had a whole long list of potential things to talk about. So we had to organize this down to the 30-minute time frame. So Eric, thanks so much for joining us today. Get things kicked off. Tell us a little about yourself.
Thanks for having me on. I'm Eric Lantis. Grew up on a hog farm north of Kearney. I've spent 30 years in ag lending, 15 years with Farm Credit. The last 5 years, I've been a relationship officer in Southeast Nebraska region.
You have a lot of practical experience, a lot of insights that was helpful for this meeting. But what impressed me the most is how your expertise didn't necessarily come natural for you. As I mentioned before, you learned from some of your past mistakes and you developed that skill. I'm going to invite everybody listening today to maybe put in some of their bad habits. Brent mentioned bad habits. Share some of the bad habits that they've observed that other people do in meetings. But I want to sort of invite you to share a story from one of the first meetings that you did, and maybe some of that bad habit that you learned about.
Yeah, you bet. It's always great starting off with how I failed the most. So I'll just dive into the story. The story about 13 years ago, I got an opportunity to lead a worker at Farm Credit. And so we have our first meeting. I walk into the meeting and I've got kind of an agenda penciled, scratched down on a sheet of paper. We walk in. Long story short, we have about a 3-hour meeting. I treated everybody for lunch in between the meeting. Everybody got a chance to talk, and we end the meeting, and I was kind of going, "Oh, that's all right." And a teammate came up to me after the meeting, and he said, "Eric, I want to tell you that was the worst meeting I've ever been to in my life." And I laughed. I thought he was joking. And he goes, "No, I'm being serious. That was absolutely awful." He goes, "It was terrible." And he gave me my feedback, and he said, "You had no agenda. It was too long. Everybody was talking about everything that didn't even pertain to what we were supposed to be doing." And he said, "And in the end, did we really get anything accomplished?" So it was really good feedback. And since then, I've definitely improved how we do my meetings anyway.
Eric, I have a couple rapid fire questions for you. What are some of the biggest missteps that you see take place when farmers are trying to get started with a meeting habit?
Yeah, a lot of them are similar to the ones I had. No agenda. Really no leader identified for the meeting. A lot of times with these family farm operations, you're dealing with, a brother, a cousin, dad, grandpa, and nobody really identifies who's the leader of that meeting. And then a lot of times we have a ton of distractions. I've been involved in some strategic meetings that we've tried to have in a shop where we've got 2 dogs running around, hired men coming in and out, and a seed dealer. So, like I said, those are some of the common ones that I've run into.
So those were the missteps. What are some of the hardest steps for producers to overcome as they start to develop that habit?
Yeah, I think the hardest step is actually to get started. Again, a lot of these family farm operations, you're dealing with family. So you're trying to start having a meeting with your brother or with your sister or dad or your grandpa. So it's people you've known and you interact with daily, and now you're starting to try to have a meeting. So it's really tough to get it started. And then to stay committed to your agenda is always a difficult thing to do too, but very important to do.
So let's say someone comes to the family and says, "We need to have a meeting." What's the biggest misconception that's going to take place amongst those family members?
Typically, anytime anybody says we need to have a meeting, that means that you instantly perceive that we're not communicating or we have a communication problem. And a lot of times people don't believe there's a communication problem, but that's a misconception. And the meeting definitely helps with communication, but there's so many more reasons that you guys went over these to have that meeting, to start the meeting. So, like I said, that's kind of that misconception is everybody thinks, "Oh, you think we don't communicate," but that's really not the case.
For anyone listening today who really wants to develop that habit, I think that's a really good piece of insight that you shared is when you say, "I want to have this meeting," everyone's going to start to turn to this, "Oh, we have a communication problem." Sort of getting ahead of that narrative or getting ahead of that can be really valuable and gaining some space there. I want to ask a little bit of a chicken versus the egg question. Do you think producers should start with strategic meetings or tactical meetings?
To me, I think they have to have both. I think both are necessary and are very important. I think you'll find that the tactical meeting is easier. It's just you're talking about planning, you're talking about harvest. Those things are easy for our family farm operators to discuss. You start getting into strategical, and you start talking about financials, goals, transitions, those type of conversations. Those are a little more difficult. Those are conversations we tend to try to avoid. But that's an extremely important meeting too. So the tactical one might seem like it's easier to organize and put together, but they are both very, very important to have.
I want to talk a little about who's in these meetings, and you had a great example that I've called the grandpa test about who needs to be in these meetings, and recognizing that some members need to be in some meetings and some members don't need to be in other meetings. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and the grandpa test, as you referred to, it's the deal where you're dealing with a family farm operation. So you got grandpa that owns about 75% of the assets because he's got the grounds and the equipment. Then you got dad involved. You got grandsons. You might have cousins, uncles, all these people involved. So, and then hired men. So your tactical meeting, that's your operation plan. That's what you're doing, the harvesting, the planning. So grandpa probably doesn't have much to do with that. He's in Arizona for 6 months and comes back and runs the grain cart. But the hired man might be, needed in that tactical meeting because he's a very crucial part of the day-to-day operation. The strategical meeting, those you got to pull in everybody, all the stakeholders that are involved. So that would probably include spouses. That could include even somebody that's located, a sibling that's located down in Florida. You might want to have a Zoom call and bring them into that strategical meeting because you could be talking about transitions, inheritance plans, estate planning, all those types of things there. So those meetings, the hired man, they don't need to be part of it. That's kind of the thought process around those stakeholders.
Really, really good, really important. There is a quote about begin with the end in mind. So if we want to have a successful family farm meeting, what would a successful meeting look like in your mind?
I think the most important thing on a meeting is when you get done, you want everyone feeling good. You want them motivated. You want them to feel connected. You want them to feel on task. You want to have them have that clear direction of what they're going to do before the next meeting or where they're going. And you want them to have that they got value out of the meeting. So that's the successful meeting. It's a good time to point out that meetings are great, but it's everything that you get done in between the meetings that's important. It's accomplishing those action steps. That's the most important thing. And then it's preparing for the next meeting. So you got to prepare it.
Well, this has been great, Eric. I have one last question for you. If you could put one piece of advice on a billboard for thousands of producers to see here in October 2022, what would that billboard say today?
Yeah, my favorite one is that saying of grass is greener on the other side. My belief is grass is greener where you water it. So, in other words, what you focus on grows. If you want to improve your efficiencies with a meeting and the value you provide out of a meeting, then focus on it. Get feedback. Stay focused on that topic.
So now we'll jump into the Q&A session. Brent, what questions do we have today?
Thanks, Carly. A couple. One with regard to strategic meetings. So, planning session or just a kind of regular, maybe quarterly or semi-annual or even annual strategy discussion. Who should be included? And then as a follow-up, what if we don't agree? And I think that will depend on the organization, but clearly I think the people who have the most direct stake in the organization as long-term success need to be involved as well. And by that I mean the people that are financially involved in the business should be involved to make sure that the organization is headed in the direction they want. It's also sometimes a good practice to bring in an outside perspective. Those people don't have to be involved and say, I don't want to share my finances with this person, but I really value their input on the direction of my organization, or give me some ideas about where things should go. It's very easy to set aside times that you can discuss those things and that are personal and you don't want to share, versus opening up the meeting for others. So I don't know if that's a great answer, but I think it depends on the organization. The other thing I think is important is, the question was like, well, what if we don't agree? Or a couple of questions along that line. What if we don't agree? Who should be involved? What if we don't agree? Who should even be in charge of the meeting? And I think that is something, you've really got to arm wrestle with. And I would guess in most organizations it's pretty clear who should lead that meeting. If you really get down to it, one personality is going to rise to the top of the heap on that as to who should be in charge of it. I just think that's something you've got to work out with your partners and your family members.
I'd jump in and it's tough of actually making the decisions. I mean, especially in the dynamics of the group, it kind of depends. But, a lot of times, typically in these family farm operations, you have one stakeholder that owns, like I said, 75% of the assets. So they're the ones that really, their decision is crucial, because they're the ones controlling the finances, that type of stuff. But I really like consensus, and and consensus works. It's not necessarily that everybody agrees, but everybody kind of gets behind and supports the decision we're making going forward. And so therefore you can feel like you're part of that decision, and you support it going forward. It maybe isn't exactly what you wanted to start with, but if the whole group is behind it, you have a lot more success moving forward if everybody supports the direction or the decision you're headed.
I've just looked through the chats on some of the things that people don't like, and I would say that, and this fits my bias too, that when you think about those two types of things, we had content and we had logistics. And I think the things that annoy people the most, it seems like, are when the logistics are a problem. And it could be maybe the chair is either too weak, or we didn't see anywhere the chair was too strong, which I've been involved in those kinds of meetings as well, where you feel like, hey, we didn't get to have that discussion we needed to have because they shut it down and moved us on, and we really need to have that discussion. So that chairperson's role is really important. And I think if you're the chair, it's really important to understand that everyone in that room is looking to you to put the agenda together and have it there and keep things moving, as well as hearing people. And it's a skill that is you're going to get better at it over time. And I think it's okay to ask for forgiveness a little bit if it doesn't work, and say, hey, I'm working on this, but it's also important to get better at it over time. And I think it's something we can get better at with practice. But those logistics things, I think, are something that really gets people hung up, and it creates a bad experience.
So that'll do it for another episode of Two Economists and a Lender. And thank you to Brent, David, and Eric for leading the conversation today. And for you online, thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you online again next month.